Welcome, everyone, to today's webcast. What security products do you need in the cloud? I am one of your hosts for this journey, Paul Asadoorian. With me today is from Security Weekly, our very own Security Weekly CEO, Mr. Matt Alderman. Matt, welcome.
Thank you, Paul. Fun topic.
Yes, absolutely. As I was saying earlier, very timely, very timely. From the LogRhythm side, who is sponsoring this webcast today, Steve Smith. He's the senior DevOps engineer. Welcome, Steve.
Hey, nice to be here. Thanks.
And Jeff Braucher. Did I say that right, Jeff?
Braucher, yeah.
Braucher.
And thanks, I'm glad to be here.
Yes, he is the senior DevOps cloud engineer. Which is all I may have some questions for you guys after the broadcast, so stick around. So thanks everyone for tuning in today. As always, you will be receiving a copy of the video and the slides. So if you missed anything or you want to go back and reference it, it will be sent to you shortly after the broadcast, in addition to sending it to everyone who's registered as well. So if you have to drop off if you couldn't make it, you're not hearing this, but you will also get a copy of the video and the slides from today. So, Matt, you want to bring us in with the agenda?
Yeah, I wanted to set up some of the aspects around the cloud first, right? We hear this term cloud first strategies. How many people are adopting cloud? We want to talk about that a little bit. I want to talk about some of the trends that I think are impacting security. As we move more and more of our infrastructure into the cloud and move our applications into the cloud, et cetera, what does that mean for security? And then who's responsible for security in these different cloud models? So I built a little matrix that we'll get into. We'll spend a little bit of time on who's responsible for security. Then we'll talk through a few cloud security challenges, obviously some budgets and benefits of cloud. And then we're going to transition over to the LogRhythm team to talk about, do I really need my security tool on-prem, or can I put some of my security tools, specifically LogRhythm, in the cloud? So that's what we're going to talk about today. So we've all heard kind of this cloud-first strategy. How many people are actually doing it? I want to thank the LogRhythm team. They actually provided this slide for us as part of the setup for the problem statement today, which is, look, 94% of respondents are using the cloud in some form or fashion. Now, there's lots of variations on cloud, whether it's public, private, infrastructure, all the way up to software as a service. But what's happening in the industry, and Paul, you and I were talking about this on Enterprise Security Weekly earlier, is that this momentum to the cloud is continuing to accelerate. We're seeing numbers from Gartner on data center spend, server spend going down. We're seeing increased spend in different types of cloud platforms. And this, people just have to realize, if it's not at an organization near you, it's coming soon. And if you're doing it, you're probably going to be doing a lot more of it very soon.
Yeah, and I think it's important, as I look at how you use the cloud as an all-encompassing term, which pieces and components you're actually using and putting in the cloud. And you've got a wide variety, right? You've got three major cloud providers, right? With Microsoft Azure, Google Cloud, and of course, Amazon being, I think, offering some of the most services out of all of them. And so you can do some infrastructure in the cloud. You can, as I do research as the CTO for Security Weekly, I'm like, I can have just an API gateway in the cloud. I can run some functions serverless in the cloud. I can use this piece maybe for some DNS, right? So everyone's cloud kind of journey at various points is going to differ greatly. And security, I think, changes drastically the more you go from, I have my own infrastructure and I'm just hosting some stuff in the cloud in terms of servers, to, I'm completely 100% serverless and I'm using all of the functionality in a cloud or multiple cloud providers and everywhere in between. Changes not only your development and strategy for your IT, but drastically changes security, right? How deep are you going to be in the cloud? I'm sure you'll touch on aspects of that, Matt.
Oh, I got a beautiful matrix for you.
Awesome.
So let's talk about some cloud trends that I think are going to impact security. And then they're already starting to in a little bit. One, we're seeing cloud providers build more of their own security products. Amazon's been doing this for years. Inspector, Guard Duty, X-Ray. I mean, there's just a slew of new security products that the cloud providers themselves are starting to build and make available to their customers. And if you think about what the cloud providers can do, they can roll out a service pretty quickly, integrate it into the rest of their offerings, probably price it pretty aggressively, which we've seen from some of the offerings from Amazon over other commercial dedicated security products. So this is something that's, I think, is going to have a major impact on security products and vendors as we move forward. And where do they fit in this paradigm of what does the cloud provider do versus what do other security products do? So we'll get into a little bit of that when we talk the matrix. The second thing is multi-cloud strategies are growing, and somewhat at the expense of hybrid solutions. And again, I think this is really important as we think about the impact of that from a security perspective, because, all right, let's say I'm AWS and Google for a second. AWS has some tools, maybe Google doesn't have some tools. So how do I get equality from a security perspective when I'm using tools from Amazon, but then I have to maybe put some additional tools in Google, for example, right? Multi-cloud strategies will force us to think about solutions that can hybridize across not only on-prem and cloud, but on-prem to probably multi-cloud, and something that we definitely have to consider.
Yeah,
and then,
Matt, you've got me thinking, like, is a secrets manager really a security solution or just something that you have to have today? And if that's in one cloud provider, if I deploy an application to another cloud provider, can I then use that secrets manager? But then you've got other services that are going to be specific to your cloud provider.
Exactly. And so how do you get those specific tools for one cloud provider into maybe a broader solution that pulls it all together and centralizes across multiple solutions? And multi-cloud, we see this already in hybrid, but I think we're also going to see this with multi-cloud and hybrid kind of pulled together. And that just creates a different way to think about security tools. And then this last trend is everyone's going serverless, which means the abstraction of the underlying infrastructure, the abstraction of the network, the abstraction of the host is here to stay, right? So lots of buzz around serverless, using function as a service and other things, which we'll talk about. But as we move more and more into these serverless type activities, that means the ability for us to protect the network or protect the endpoint is harder and harder because we won't have control at that layer anymore. And we got to think about moving our security into higher levels of the stack.
I have a question for the panel in respects to serverless technology and how it compares maybe to some more traditional technologies. Every time you spin up a serverless function, if it needs to like reach out to the internet to do something, and then it closes itself down, when you spin up another instance, do you get different IP addresses every time? Or is that like a configurable kind of thing? Does anyone know the answer to that?
My experience with serverless is you don't have control over that. I've never seen it configurable, but possible. So I would assume a new IP.
You would get new IPs, right? Or every once in a while, or you don't have control over which new IP addresses you get. It sounds like. Steve.
Yeah, and you might know. Yeah, go ahead, Jeff.
I was just going to say it could also vary from cloud provider to cloud provider.
Sure.
It's amazing when you go look, some of these things that you didn't think were possible have just been released as a new feature.
Yep. But that's interesting from a security perspective, as we really hold true, like the IP address is something that we can use for security controls, and that really kind of goes out the window when it comes to serverless. Specifically, if you're providing API quotas, how do you do that if you've got serverless functions that are accessing someone else's API and stuff like that? So,
I think you even just the host that the application was running on itself is also not included in that equation, right?
Right.
We like to talk about the IP address and the system where a log originated from, and if there's no system, then you can't use that information either.
Right. It's a great point.
Yeah, and I use Fargate as a great example to this, Paul, right? Is I have a container image that gets spun up as a running instance of the container in Fargate, and then that thing might come down. I may still pull from the same image, but it's a different running instance potentially of that container. How do you track across all that?
Yeah.
It's really challenging and interesting in a serverless type environment because, again, you can't trust the IP address.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe aspects of fingerprinting the running instance of the container or something like that to create some understanding of, have I seen that before? Is that new? These are all the things in a mutable infrastructure that get really challenging.
Yep. Agreed.
Yep. So let's go to my graphic. And so one of the things that Paul, you and I and John have talked about this on Enterprise Security Weekly is starting to come up with this cloud security matrix. Who's responsible for security in the cloud? And the answer is it depends on the type of cloud. So I put together this quick matrix that we can walk through, and over time, you and I will continue to expand this out. But let's start on the far left, right? On-premise. I'm responsible as the customer for every part of the stack, from the network layer all the way up to the application layer, which means I need to make investments in security tools across that entire stack. Okay, makes sense. Now let's say I'm going cloud first strategy and I decide I don't want to run my own data centers. The traditional move is to infrastructure as a service. That means I'm taking my network, storage, compute, and virtualization layers, buying an EC2 instance in Amazon, for example. Then I manage the operating system, the orchestrator, container function, and application all the way up. So what the cloud providers are doing are providing different security capabilities down at those levels that they're managing, right? This is where something like a inspector comes in, or CloudTrail, or some of those types of solutions, right? To give you some visibility into that, but they're managed more by the cloud provider themselves. I own the operating system level and up, which means I need to now make investments at that layer. Then what we see people start to do is, okay, Kubernetes is really, really hard, or a certain function or capability is really, really hard. So you move away from dedicated infrastructure as a service. You now start to look at platform as a service. Well, in platform as a service, a couple more layers are being abstracted away. I'm abstracting away aspects of the operating system and potentially the orchestrator, ECS and EKS in Amazon. Perfect example. It's orchestration as a service. Consider it a platform as a service. Amazon's managing the orchestration layer and everything down. Now, I still have to run my containers. I may still have some functions, and I still own the app. But the layers of things I have to do from a security perspective continue to shift. Function as a service takes us to the next level with a Lambda, where the whole platform around Lambda is managed by the provider. I'm really at the application layer. And if you go full-blown SaaS, the SaaS providers pretty much own the security stack through the entire process. So this is how security will vary in the cloud depending on the types of cloud services you're actually buying and using.
And so, Matt, Fargate is a platform as a service.
Roughly, yeah.
Or is it kind of in between a function and a platform?
It's a unique variation of a platform as a service. I think I call it container as a service. It's more of a container as a service offering.
Yeah.
But it resembles a platform as a service type of, or a function as a service type of capability. Fargate, the only thing you need to do in Fargate basically is you need the egress IP and which containers you want to run and how much memory and CPU you want them to run on, and Fargate spins those up for you.
It's awesome. And in the SaaS model, to use your app user data, the provider owns the application, everything down. Really, you're responsible for your data and your users and your identity, right?
Correct. Yeah, because now you're going to provide the access to that SaaS platform. So identity is still a big part of this.
Yep.
And you're always going to be responsible for the data since it is your data, whether it's in a SaaS platform or in some other platform, you still have to own data. So that's why I didn't put those two layers in here, because the model gets a little confusing when you try to add those. But yes.
And your database can kind of vary, right? I mean, conceivably you could be deploying to a platform and still maintain your own database if you wanted to, right? I think most people in an Amazon model go to something like an RDS because it just makes more sense.
Right. Makes life a lot easier.
It does.
But again, people can pick and choose. And if you're in Azure, then you're using, SQL as a service from Microsoft, for example. Exactly right.
I like that slide. Well done.
Yeah, more work to come on that one.
That's awesome.
So if we think about this issue then so what are some of those big cloud security challenges? So look, we've known for years that lack of visibility and control in the cloud is one of the first big challenges every organization has to go through. And again, when you think about the layers that are being abstracted away in those different models we just walked through, that visibility and control gets removed at more layers as you move further to the right on that graphic. And so that's always been a big challenge for organizations. I think we've seen some very interesting application of traditional security technologies to try to account for that, but we've also seen a lot of innovation in new ways to gain visibility and control at the application layer, at different layers, than relying on network and endpoint, for example. So that's one big one. I think the thing we see the most now when it comes to breaches is misconfiguration of multiple cloud services. To your point, Paul, right? We could implement a lot of different offerings from AWS, and we do have a number ourselves, and we're looking at more. But if any one of those services is misconfigured, it creates an entry point into a really highly complex environment and potentially allows a breach to happen due to that misconfiguration across different things. We've seen lots of S3 misconfigurations that have allowed S3 bucket leaks, right? And so misconfiguration, I think, is a big challenge, and managing overall configuration of your cloud services is a big security challenge going forward.
Well, and I think one of the big things, too, is if you break it down to a very basic thing about which services, to use a general term, are exposed to the internet and which ones are not in your entire cloud infrastructure, that sounds like an easy thing. When it was all on premise, right, it was much easier, right? We could use sniffers and firewalls and we could get a handle on. But now when it's in multiple cloud providers and you've got multiple services, what is, and developers can spin up something new, is that being spun up with access to the internet? Is an API exposed? Is a service exposed to the internet that we didn't intend? And so at its very basic level, you need something to keep tabs on that, some type of automation, in my opinion.
Yeah, agreed. And one of the questions will be, where does that automation come? So we've seen a lot of tools try to do this from the runtime side, right? They'll kind of integrate in with the management consoles for the cloud and try to do this at runtime. I'm seeing some products and working with some early stage startups that are actually trying to do this before the infrastructure gets configured, before it gets spun up. Because in the cloud, everything's pretty much defined as code. It's everything is code really at the end of the day. My Kubernetes cluster, the host that it's running on, the network, they're all configured through some sort of code, right? A configuration file. And so if you can actually look for misconfiguration in that code, then you could actually have a better way of securing the infrastructure before it's actually physically spun up in the cloud environment. So we'll see some interesting, I think, evolution and capabilities there coming soon.
Yeah, and a great example of that, and something that's easy, is as you're building your infrastructure, you're likely going to assign your own host names and DNS names to your applications that live in the cloud. However, a lot of things that get built in the cloud also have an IP address and a host name that's assigned by Amazon, for example, right? And if you see people trying to hit those aren't legitimate users. So like a really easy configuration is only allow people that are, going to this particular URL or host name to access the application and basically block everything else. I learned that recently is a very easy thing to do to kind of limit access. And there's like millions of other things you can do along those lines, right? When you're building and deploying.
Yep. And it's all embedded in your code and your configuration files.
Yep.
The last big challenge I see coming in this space is integrating security solutions across hybrid and multi-cloud deployments. again, we talked a little bit about this, as we see more multi-cloud deployments, how do you take all this security tooling and data, bring it together, centralize it, so you really have a good picture of what the heck's going on, whether it's on-prem to AWS or whether it's AWS to Google. This is going to be where complexities come in and where the integration points, I think, for various security solutions comes in to be able to centralize that view across these very diverse environments. And let's not forget about budget, right? The other big thing that's going to happen in this discussion is both on the security tooling side and the cloud side, right? I'm moving from CapEx, capital expenditures, to operational expenditures. I might move from traditional term-based, perpetual licensing now to subscription-based, because we're talking about services that are going to come on and off or up and down. So you're seeing a lot of trends moving to subscription-based models. Maybe a consumption model, pay for what you use. That's the whole power behind Fargate, right? Is you only pay for the containers you're running for the period of time that you're running them. And so this consumption-based model in the cloud is going to come in, I think, and impact us as security vendors as well, because as these budgets are shifting and then people are getting used to consumption-based models, what does that do to our pricing mechanisms? And maybe it could be a managed service as well, but we've got to think about the budget impacts that the cloud are going to have on organizations, but also how that's going to affect how we're buying different tools and solutions and fitting them into very similar models.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, also your internet access becomes super important, right? If you're hosting on premise, you control the network. And when I was a network engineer, we would do network engineering to make sure on premise it was up. Then once services start going off into the cloud, your internet becomes more than just like how people get and receive email and stuff like that, to the business has to run. If we don't have internet, it doesn't run. So your network architecture has to change, potentially your cost structure too, right? Now you're paying for services in the cloud. You may be paying for internet services, maybe across multiple sites, and that has to be factored in as well.
Yeah, and all the pricing fun with the cloud providers, right? Data in is free.
Yes.
But data out costs you bandwidth, right? Got to account for that in your model. How much data is coming in versus how much data is going out has an impact on your budget. Going across different regional zones has a different charge than if everything's running in the same regional zone. So there's a lot of nuances when it comes to costs in the cloud that also will play into budgets and usage as well.
And that's not easy to navigate.
No, kind of a pain, but yeah.
We ask Matt. Matt's got pretty good. Matt's got like the PhD in cloud charges.
But cloud has potential benefits for a lot of people, right? Ease of deployment and use. It's really easy to spin up infrastructure and or platform capabilities in the cloud and start using them like immediately. You don't have to wait for IT to procure a server, put it in a rack, power it up, throw in a network cable, right? There is a level of reliability, especially in the platform as a service. And as you move up the stack into function and even SaaS, a lot of reliability built into these platforms from the get-go makes it a little easier for things like disaster recovery, business continuity, and in certain cases, you can get enhanced security. Like I said, in a platform as a service where the bulk of the security work is being done by the cloud provider, that allows you to potentially have a baseline set of security that you don't have to worry about. And then you can really focus on where to add the additional layers of security back to that matrix and really be effective in creating a better secure offering for your customers, for yourselves, whatever that case might be. These are all some of the potential benefits of moving to cloud.
And now we'll turn it over to Steve and Jeff from LogRhythm.
Yeah, thanks, guys. So you've touched on a lot of subjects that we feel very much the same way about. We've found that the industry likes moving toward subscription-based models. Capital expenses are typically large and involve capacity planning, sometimes multiple years out. That's an issue, I think, in most data centers, generally speaking, and it's an issue with the LogRhythm product as well. If you're planning on threat detection, you have to have some sense of, based on your log traffic, you have some sense of how much growth to plan for to make sure that you're able to process the amount of logs you're producing, not just today, but next year and the year after. So when you buy sort of a traditional LogRhythm appliance, you're also buying all of the responsibilities that come with operating a large computing cluster, or for some customers, a large one, on-prem. So you'll be responsible for your own data backups. You'll be responsible for software updates, the OS, the application itself, and then for LogRhythm, we have something called a knowledge base that you have to pull down regularly. So there's just kind of a lot of sort of things that you sort of take on by choosing to run a solution on-prem, whether it's the LogRhythm appliance or just really any kind of computer solution. So when we talk about software as a service for LogRhythm, really what we're trying to do is get people more into that SaaS model where it's a consumption-based model. Ease of use is really what we're trying to push. So we want our customers to start out their sort of experience with our product by sort of getting value in the first day and having it up and running and onboarding log sources rather than maybe racking and stacking. And really we want overall just to have people spending their time on things that are valuable to them rather than just kind of getting a solution up and running.
Jeff, a quick question there. So in this move from traditional on-premise deployment of the LogRhythm SIEM, this is a fully managed SaaS offering now, really, right? Is you're providing the interface, managing the application stack all the way down. Really, it's for the users then to get their different log collectors in place to point to the platform so that you can do all the things that LogRhythm does, which is awesome. But you're really managing that whole infrastructure stack now for the customer.
Yes, that's correct. And that's actually a good place to start before we even get into why you might want it. We like to think of it as the first sort of true appliance that we've ever sold because it is turnkey in the sense that by the time you're onboarding, after you've signed up, you're logging into the web interface and using the product immediately. So there isn't even a point of powering it on. Your first experience is logging into the web interface and getting started using it. So it's truly a turnkey offering. And but kind of like you mentioned with security and SaaS products, there's not zero effort. It's just a matter of starting with setting up your log collection, setting up your rules, getting your system tuned to focus on the areas of your infrastructure that you're particularly interested in monitoring.
Yeah, so instead of dealing with all the infrastructure requirements to get the server even running, now it's just really about, okay, how do I set up my log collection? How do I set up my rules? It's really more of an administrative kind of setup routine than it is a bunch of deployment, installation, and then kind of the administration setup.
That's exactly right, yes. So that's a big part of what we're trying to say here is get started using the application. That's the part we want you to focus on. Let us handle the stack below that. We'll make sure that you have the storage you need. We'll take care of the basic monitoring. We can take care of all the software updates. That's a huge one for our customers, make sure that the product is stable and kept up to date. And really just make sure that, your time is all on that application layer, getting value from the product.
Yeah, and I think, the elephant in the room is the level of trust you have with your own capabilities to provide security in your stack that you have here on this slide versus the SaaS provider or the cloud provider or both to provide that level of security. And the decision that you're faced with is, can I provide equal or better security if I do it myself and host it on premise, or do I trust that the SaaS provider and cloud provider are going to do a better job than I can? And that's going to differ in different circumstances, services, and applications, right?
Sure, and I think it's one of those situations where you're talking about is this where I want to spend my resources, right? Both time and people. Yep. Is this something that I'm okay letting go of? and the other benefit is I also don't have to do these things now, and then there's a cost benefit there.
Right, and you give up some control in that, so it's always a trade-off. I mean, we've done that, here internally too, right? But it's a decision that everyone's faced with, and it's not an easy one. I mean, in some cases it might be, but usually, you have some regrets about not having that control, but then you think back like, wow, but I still don't have to worry about the application and operating system updates for this application, right?
Sure, yeah. So Jeff and I had a revelation while we were putting together our talk here, and it was about email, right? So if you can remember 10 years ago or so, people had this same battle inside their head about letting go of their corporate email, right?
Yep.
Can I let this go up to a Google, Gmail instance somewhere? Is this something I'm okay with as an organization? And I think, in the last 10 years, I think people have gotten a lot more comfortable with that. We're facing sort of the same sort of situation here, I think, with security tools.
Yeah, I think I was scarred early on in my career when I had to manage SendMail for like tens of thousands of users. And then I was like, wow, I can let someone else do this. That's awesome.
Right. Forget about all that before.
Right, exactly. Ugh.
Well, and I think one of the big challenges with the SIEM is storage. I mean, think about it, right?
Yeah.
As you add more and more log sources, predicting how much storage you need and growing your storage size. I mean, this is probably one of the biggest challenges for most of your customers, I would imagine, is how much space do I need for all this logs? It's based on how many log sources, how much you're collecting, how long you're retaining, etc. So you guys had to have done some really good, masterful storage planning algorithms, I think, here to really kind of make this work well for your customers.
Yeah, and
I think it's something we spend a lot of time on. Sure. I think it's something we spend a lot of time on figuring out between, for all of our customers, average log sizes, MPS, and offering the appropriate options for the customers in terms of, searchable TTL and archive capacity and those sorts of things.
And then not having to manage your storage locally, in my opinion, has advantages, right? I don't have to wake up early in the morning or stay late at night to do maintenance, to swap a drive out or upgrade the firmware on a drive array, right? That goes away. And I think, Steve, you said earlier, then I can focus my time on doing other things that are more beneficial and not that everyday maintenance that comes along with hosting your own storage.
That's right. Another thing I'd add to that, a common question we get is, why isn't the SaaS offering a lot cheaper? And storage, believe it or not, is a big reason. You still have to store the same amount of data in our SaaS offering, or if you host it in a cloud, a public cloud yourself as a sort of self-hosted cloud deployment, versus if you're just running it on-prem the traditional way. You don't get away from the fact that you have a certain amount of data to store, and that's not free no matter where it's done. But it is much easier to grow it and manage it in the cloud. And it's even fair to say that when we're doing it as a part of our SaaS offering, it's much easier than what a customer has to do when they do it themselves on-prem with actual physical drives.
Sure.
One more quick thing I want to throw in while we've got this slide up is we're talking about whether you're comfortable handing off your security to a SaaS offering. And we feel, I think we're pretty proud to say that our SaaS offering is basically the same offering as our on-prem product. You can choose to go either way as a LogRhythm customer, and you just have to realize if you're not comfortable having the security handled in the cloud by a SaaS provider, that's fine. You're just taking on that entire left-hand side when you make that decision. And it comes down to the same question again. Do you want to spend your time on that or not? If you do, that is fine. It's just that makes you more appropriate to host yourself and to spend your time on that.
Right. Yeah, and we've seen a lot of other successful SaaS companies get over that hurdle, which I think makes it easier for you and others as you move into that space to, it's been out there for years now. I don't think those are as big a concerns as they used to be. I think with the way we've enhanced technologies, the way we can leverage cloud platforms today, I'm not sure that's the same concern. But look, customers have a choice, so they can pick either way.
That's right.
Yep.
So yeah, again, really, our cloud offering is the same product that we've been selling as a business for many years. Same product that all of our existing customers are still running. It's just now turnkey in the cloud. They are actually appliances. So getting into some of the nuts and bolts a little bit, these are fully isolated SIEMs for every customer, and that comes with it some extra growth. There's a lot of by keeping all of our customer deployments isolated, we're not taking some of the advantages of maybe a multi-tenant solution, but what we are doing is ensuring that there's no chance that customer data will ever bleed between two installations. That is enforced by our cloud provider using their data protection mechanisms. And likewise, our cloud deployments are very much like appliances. Behind the scenes, it's the same kinds of systems that people are operating when they run this on-prem. That's important because we don't want people to feel like they're getting two different things, or if they choose on-prem versus SaaS, that they might not have all the same capabilities. We really want those to be matched up. When you are using our SaaS offering, your sort of interaction with the product is reduced. You're down to a few web interfaces, our admin console, which we've now provided over a web interface, and then our sort of traditional security analyst console where you get most of your value. That's where you find out about actual active threats and you respond to things going on in your environment. But yeah, effectively, it's the same product, but now all you have to do is use it, log into it, respond to threats, and there's only a few places where you even really interact with it, kind of shown here. So yeah, I guess that's just to give you a sense of what the offering is.
Sure, I think just letting us operate it for you. We've set up email so that it just works. You don't have to worry about configuring that. And like Jeff said, it is the same product. So we were able to leverage all the maturity of the platform that we've constructed over the years and immediately launch something of great value, we think, as a SaaS model in the cloud.
So from a config, this makes sense, right? For me, there's a number of things that kind of get integrated into your traditional model. So data sources, right, for the logs. Is that just pointing them to the cloud instance and allowing those logs to flow directly into the cloud? Is it that simple as just, kind of repoint where the logs need to go? Is it?
Yeah, it really is. So your agents will continue running wherever you have them installed. In this case, you'll just repoint them to an FQDN that we provide to you, and they'll just flow right into your SIEM in the cloud.
And that works the same way for the agent technology that's sitting on the box that's doing FIM and some of the other functionalities that LogRhythm has too, then, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, since it's the same product, the agents just work like they always have, and they point to a data processor right in the cloud.
Yeah, it's really a good example where it is as it's always been. One thing we can say about the cloud offering is those agents can be anywhere in the world. And that was an interesting piece of feedback we got from one of our beta customers, was they had log sources from all over the place. Sometimes in this particular customer's case, they had log sources coming from networks that weren't entirely managed by them, and it may not always be possible to get those logs back to the SIEM that they had at their headquarters. But in the cloud, it's very easy to get your collectors attached and sending logs, and that's an interesting advantage you get in the cloud.
Yeah, I believe in this case, the company had just acquired another organization and had not yet assimilated all the data centers and networks and stuff into the Borg, and in fact they were able to get all that data right into the cloud and find something that wasn't quite right going on in the new company's the newly acquired company's network, and they were able to respond to that right away.
Yeah, nobody likes those big open holes in the firewall to let some of that traffic through, right?
Yeah, and that's why I like the agent technology, because it can encrypt my data, make the connection, and it's seamless. If you've ever configured syslog and remote syslogging, it can be quite the task, especially as you go across multiple operating systems or even different flavors of Linux and or Windows, right? There's a lot of configuration. But now does that option still exist if I'm in the cloud? Can I do it without the agent?
No, so our data processor receives LogRhythm agent connections and data. The current pattern that on-prem customers use is sending syslog to an agent installed somewhere else,
Gotcha.
and then those messages being forwarded to the data processor. That pattern absolutely works, just as it does on-prem.
Perfect.
I think agentless collection is a topic we're very interested in. It's kind of on our roadmap. So one version of that could be what you described, having like a secure syslog endpoint. There isn't really a technical barrier to that yet. We just haven't gotten there, and it hasn't been a high ask so far. The second one would be collection from the cloud deployment, and that's another one that kind of makes sense, although opens questions about how much you want to permit our SaaS offering to reach into some of your log sources. I wanted to mention, we were talking about multi-cloud earlier. I think an advantage of using LogRhythm Cloud, kind of similar to the one I already pointed out, is if you're collecting logs from multiple public cloud providers, I think it makes sense that your aggregation point is also in a public cloud, rather than having your on-prem SIEM trying to harvest information from all these different sources. It makes sense to have that itself be a cloud deployment as well. And that way, whatever volume of traffic you have coming into it, it's a cloud provider that's handling that networking rather than trying to aggregate everything down into one place. And why is it important to aggregate? We want a single pane of glass for threat detection. So at some point, you want all of that data collected and stored in a single place where you can see all of the potential threats to your infrastructure in one spot.
And I only need one agent, one system to have that agent, and I can point whatever logs at that system, whether it's in the cloud or on premise, and then that agent will forward. I'm assuming you do some fancy stuff to differentiate the logs that are coming in, right? Because they're not from that host, they're from other hosts that are sending it.
Yeah, absolutely. You'd be configuring some virtual log sources and things to disambiguate the log messages and their sources.
Awesome.
And the only limit to that agent is how high it can go. I mean, at some point, it can't handle more than a certain MPS, certain messages per second. But yeah, it works as you described. Otherwise.
Awesome.
So from here, I guess we just go just another layer deeper here. One of the things we recognized starting with a single tenant implementation is that we would need to rely heavily on automation. So we spent a lot of time investing in that up front. So we built out an infrastructure that is scalable both in terms of the deployment type and obviously vertical size. This enables us to stand up SIEMs at will without any human interaction. And do it in a consistent way that delivers the results that we've expected and tested for over time. Another thing that we wanted to do was be able to tell a really good audit story, and we'll get into SOC 2 in a little bit. But we knew we needed to set our minds and the minds of our customers at ease by bringing in some just-in-time zero privilege techniques for SIEM access. So we like to say that no one has access to your SIEM by default but you, the customer. If we need to get involved operationally, if some of our monitoring tools are tipping us off to a problem via alerts or pages, we go through a very rigorous process we call it a break glass process that records who and when and to what and then why. That delivers access to your SIEM. It's a short duration. It expires automatically with no action by anyone else, and that allows us to get in and address whatever operational issues there are, and then get back out. I talked about monitoring in real time. We do have an SLA for LogRhythm Cloud, as you would hope. And we take care of a lot of those things in that chart that we had up a little bit ago. All the keeping the lights on type activities, backups, KB updates, operational stuff like AV and OS patching. Most importantly, our customers are thrilled about the product upgrades. That's something they don't have to do anymore. Getting back to SOC 2, so we've got our SOC 2 Type 1 compliance, approval. We're going through the Type 2 audit period right now. And that requires a lot of these, escalation techniques and auditing capabilities that we've built in from the ground up. And, we're happy about, getting that SOC 2 Type 2. We're also looking at a number of other compliance certificates as we move forward. People have brought up, what about PCI DSS? There's a number out there that we're looking at and are on our roadmap for sure. That's a little bit of the detail that goes into how we kind of implemented this solution. We view it as best practices of service. We kind of like to say, who better to run your SIEM than the company that wrote it? And we feel like we really delivered on that with LogRhythm Cloud.
So a couple questions came in. Yeah, let me get to a couple questions because they're very relevant. So one of the listeners asked about FedRAMP. Is that one of those certifications you're looking at? And which level would you guys look at?
Yeah, I think that one has definitely come up. I was looking for that one. That's definitely something that's been brought up, and our product manager is definitely weighing implementation of that one.
I think that one's further out because it includes some additional controls that are a little harder to meet. It's definitely of high interest, so we're aware of the sort of market out there, but I think it'll be a while before we'll be able to offer that, even though
it depends.
Certainly.
It depends on your level too, right? So traditionally what I've seen cloud providers do is SOC 2 Type 1, which is self-attestation. Then you got the SOC 2 Type 2, which is validation of the internal controls. That gets you close to FedRAMP, depending on the level of FedRAMP. There might be some additional things you have to do, but that's typically the order I've seen them go in. So it sounds like you're going down a similar path.
Yeah, I think once we have the Type 2, that'll be the point where we can sort of talk about what our next target is.
Sure, and we always encourage our customers to reach out to their account teams and make their wants known, and that helps bring all the feedback right to the product management staff.
I guess I wanted to add to that last bullet, the best practices as a service comes back to reliability and ease of use. So our sort of number one, our two most common issues with customers is either issues with installation and upgrade because it's an involved process, or maybe some kind of a capacity problem on the customer end, maybe having a network issue or not enough storage. When we say best practices as a service, we mean that we are confident that our product will operate to its design when it's in the exact right sort of environment, and that's what we provide in the cloud. Is we know for sure the network's up to snuff, that the compute resources are adequate, and so forth. What we're trying to show here is more how you should be thinking about costs. This is a question we can't avoid. What is it that I'm getting cost-wise by switching to a cloud offering versus staying on-prem? And I think what we mostly want to do is dispel the sort of illusion that your subscription costs and your license costs are the only two values that you should be comparing. That's kind of looking at the iceberg above the surface of the water. The cloud subscription cost is higher because we're doing everything else for you. Like we are handling all of that storage, provisioning it, and making sure it's adequate. So that is where you're seeing a higher subscription cost. But if you look at all of the other things that go into operating a SIEM, particularly when you look at the effort and sort of the cost of running a large deployment in your data center, you'll find that you're actually not saving as much as you might think by running it on-prem or self-hosted in a cloud provider. And in fact, we had some numbers we were going to show here, but we couldn't get them to a point where it was really easy to make a case for cheaper or more expensive. It really depends on your average log size, how many analysts you have, what kinds of rules you've put in place. Those things can affect how well you can operate the product with less hardware sort of on-prem versus in the cloud. But we've definitely seen cases where it was actually cheaper just to use the SaaS offering. I think that was for like a larger size customer, and maybe on the smaller side, you can find that it's more cost effective to run on-prem, but it really comes out close and it depends on the customer. So what we're trying to say here is really we want you to get the value of the product. We want it to be easy to use and to catch threats for you. And cost-wise, I think it's hard to put a value on how much you're saving just when you have something working and delivering value without your staff spending time on it.
We've got a couple questions coming in. How does having a cloud offering impact your ability to do automated responses with hybrid solutions?
Sure. I'm not quite sure about the hybrid solutions part there, but I think the question is referring to our smart response capability. We have some smart responses that are loaded by default in cloud, and they are the agent action based smart response plugins only. We're again thrilled to add ones as demand arises. We've just not provided the ones that execute on the server side, which is something that we have to deal with on the SaaS side.
So when it's in the cloud, I'm assuming there's an API that's accessible to customers for that instance as well to interact with LogRhythm.
Yeah, so we provide access to the API gateway. It was a few slides back, I believe, and that's via the traditional HTTPS method.
Okay.
So.
Yeah, and that enables certain tools we provide as well. Like we have a true identity client that can be used. This is actually relevant. The cloud customers, it's a way to sort of load some of your identity information when you don't have the product on-prem, accessing your local directories right away.
It also enables our UEBA offering. LR Cloud's fully compatible and works with Cloud AI, so you can absolutely leverage that too.
Awesome.
One of the interesting choices you made on deployment, there's a couple more questions that flowed through, Paul. A lot of the early cloud providers built multi-tenant platforms, right? They wanted to build the core infrastructure once, make it really easy to onboard a customer, and then scale the size of the platform. You guys took a really interesting approach in not being multi-tenant, just spinning up new infrastructure for each customer. And as I think about where DevOps is and some of the activities and automation that we've seen through that process, it's probably a heck of a lot easier to do that now than maybe doing a multi-tenant platform.
That's true.
That's actually it's a great question. Well, first of all, our product does have multi-tenancy in it, and a lot of our customers use that when they buy the product. But that's more multi-tenancy for them if they want to host sort of their own tenants. So it would have been a little bit sort of awkward to be having a sort of like an invisible multi-tenancy when you sign up for the SaaS offering, but then also allow the customer to kind of implement their own multi-tenancy. I think the other reason why we didn't go that route is we really wanted the cloud offering to resemble appliances. That's not just for the engineering staff. That helps our professional services group support it. It helps our support org understand it. It's really, it enables all of the rest of the community and the culture around LogRhythm to support and operate the SaaS offering just as they did all of the appliance. We're in an interesting point where a good percentage of our customers are still on-prem appliance customers and will remain that way. We're hoping to change that with LogRhythm Cloud, but we can't really sort of flip a switch and suddenly have a whole different multi-tenant offering that really doesn't look and feel the same as the true product.
Yeah, I think that's right on. We also saw where we wanted to provide some value in the SaaS space right away as there's demand there. And the quickest way to do that is, like Jeff said, leveraging our existing expertise as far as operating this product and supporting it in the cloud for our existing customers.
I liked what you said too as well. Believe it or not, is not as difficult to automate single tenancy and to support it as you might think. It's really just running a lot of parallel automation, and it scales well. Horizontal scaling is well supported in all cloud providers, and that's what a single tenant model ends up being. So it's not as bad as it sounds. It does affect cost. We have resources allocated for every customer, and they may not be fully utilized. Although, kind of as we were saying earlier, if you're using the storage, which you will be in LogRhythm, it's consumed storage, whether it's single tenant or multi-tenant. Either way, it's bytes on disk.
Right.
Yeah, and again, performance impacts that as well, and being able to process the data quickly and get the analytics done and getting the alerts done.
Yep.
I mean, sometimes in a multi-tenant platform, sometimes you give up a little bit of that performance optimization because you have shared resources. You don't have that here. And when I think about a SIEM and needing to perform, it's probably the right trade-off to keep performance high.
And let's just say we haven't closed the door on multi-tenancy. This is just where we are today. So certainly the future holds probably a much more elaborate multi-tenant solution that will address that. We just wanted to get something to market that was familiar and reliable as quickly as possible.
Also, to jump back a tiny bit, I don't want to keep harping on the operational piece, but you talk about performance. We, in learning a lot about the product over the last few years, it's become apparent that some of our customers with on-prem deployments don't have a lot of time or expertise to spare to actually operating it, right? Put on a sysadmin hat, like you said, after hours and making sure the disks aren't full and stuff like that. By the time some of the support cases get into our queues and escalated, what started out as a small problem has become, something that impacts the SIEM's ability to do its job. And that's something that we also address with LR Cloud with our monitoring and alerting is we're making sure the system's healthy at all times. And if something needs to happen, we're working, on our own or with the customer to make sure we've got the right infrastructure in place to handle their uses.
I guess add to that we avoid, not entirely, but we are better protected from a catastrophic failure in the sense that our deployments are isolated and can operate independently. One risk you get with a large multi-tenant cloud offering is the whole thing can become unavailable at once. And it's, unfortunate.
That's never happened.
I wish I could. Yeah, exactly.
Tell that to US East 1 and AWS.
Yeah, exactly. Right? Or we depend on a lot of SaaS vendors just to operate our product, and it makes us feel better whenever they're unavailable. But it's an unfortunate reality that a different kind of risk that you take on with a large multi-tenant scaled product.
Yeah. Just quickly, there's a number of questions coming in. It sounds like there's been a number of Fed folks on this webcast because they're asking about break access personnel to U.S. persons only. That's usually a Fed type question. Obviously, FedRAMP and going FedRAMP high, because I think most of the people listening in the federal space are thinking go FedRAMP high or don't, because then you can go into any of the agencies. So lots of questions around the Fed side, just for you guys to keep in the back of your mind as you're moving forward. And then, if not obviously covered, what is their availability and DR model?
And the last question was about NDR. Was that what I heard?
Availability and disaster recovery model.
Oh, the disaster recovery. Yeah.
Okay.
Do you want to take a shot?
Sure. Yeah. So we operate these in different regions as needed on a per customer basis. We use our SLA to ensure uptime for our customers, and we have, as we say, we have backups in place for EMDB, for all of your archive logs, and in the event of a disaster, we would be spinning up a brand new instance alongside your old one and be importing data and getting you off the ground just as fast as we could.
Got it. Okay.
Awesome.
That seems to be the most of them there, Paul.
Absolutely. Well, Jeff and Steve, thank you so much for appearing on the webcast today. Matt, thank you as well. Thank you, everyone, for listening and watching to the broadcast today. Again, everyone will get a copy of the slides and the video. We'll see you next time.
Nice. Thanks a lot.
For having us.
Take care.